Horizon Chasongusuji reaction. This is India's problem with Russia is worse than you think. Our channel, yes, task and purpose. Another channel which is like great, any geopolitics, military, any military related or any geopolitics related, I guess. So yeah, obviously a lot of his military things like tanks and things like how military is improving around the world and things like that. Yeah, this is the only channel I've come across which covers a larger area like that. Usually something like Federation who just covers only US related things, incidents, military, right? There are channels like Mustard and things, right? Real Engineering who just basically engineering related things like planes, tanks, things like that. Task and Purpose covers all of them, and also geopolitics, which is good. And he's really good at it. So far, it's been interesting. So yeah, this is about India's problem with Russia. Now, what is he going to talk about here? Obviously, when it comes to technological wise, that is becoming a problem with Russia because I don't know what it is, right? But India is like acquiring like Western equipment as well. Very recently, a few years ago, I think India acquired and also brokered a deal with France about the Rafale, whatever it's called, the jet planes, which is supposedly better than F-16s. Not as good as F-22, but better than F-16, I guess. So, Rafale planes, so now we have like 50 or something, right? All of this in pursuit to make sure that, defense is high against China and Pakistan, basically. And now since China and Pakistan is like a strong ally, it becomes even worse, right? And with the what is that Belt and Road Initiative, when that finishes, it's going to be even more stronger. At that time, Pakistan, China might as well be just one thing, right? So because of that, if China and Pakistan both attacks, they have a literal road in their, with connecting each other that could support each other military wise. So it's just becoming worse and worse. Now, Russia's relationship with India is really strong. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. It shouldn't go anywhere. Knowing the history, Russia has been the only reliable partner so far in the global stage. When things were really needed, Soviet Union / Russia was always there. So yeah, let's watch it. Remember, if you like my reaction, don't forget to subscribe. So I know which type of videos to react to more. Check out the reaction. This is the link in the description. And yeah, let's watch it.
India has enjoyed a long history of mutually beneficial relations with Russia. Today, India is the world's largest buyer of Russian military hardware, accounting for 20% of Moscow's orders. This works out to $13 billion worth of Russian defense equipment over the past 5 years. The reality of why India feels they need to work with Russia is far more complicated than you might imagine, and it all has to do with their attempts to build an economy and military powerful enough to counter what they believe is their biggest threat, their neighbor China. And their economic ties go even deeper than that. Today, India has become the third largest buyer of Russian oil at $24 billion annually. But this partnership is now being tested after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I'm going to attempt to untangle the complicated, messy...
It's not being tested. Russia knows that India cannot just fully support Russia. At best, they can hope for being neutral, which India is neutral. Putin knows this, right? If anything, their worst nightmare was like India actually siding with the West against Russia, which didn't happen. So they're like, okay, if any other party was in power in India, like the other party, Congress, they're called, right? This is BJP, other is Congress. Congress probably would have gone the West route. That would have been disastrous for many reasons. The current party basically has like a longer vision. What's going to happen from 15 years from 20 years from shit like that. That doesn't work with the other party. So historically, right, first US was like a decent partner of India. That was the case long ago. But because of Cold War, they switched side and then became partner with China just to counter Russia, right? And also Pakistan at that time. And when Pakistan was an aggressor and tried to attack Indian's border, basically, there's a time where US, France, UK, basically Western powers not just sided with Pakistan, but sent their equipment, like, I don't know, submarines and things against India. This is the time where Soviet Union basically sent their nuclear submarines and things in the Indian Ocean just to like balance it out. If they didn't do that, India would have been like walked over like completely. India would have lost, massively, would have lost a lot of land as well. I don't know what they sold to their people. US, France, and UK, usually they have to give some kind of like a thing to their people, like why we are doing this, and usually they have to justify it morally. I don't know how they justified Pakistan being the aggressor and them supporting them. But Russia, Soviet Union, basically that time supported India like that, and since then they have always supported that. Even very recently, in like 21st century, there was an instant that happened in China where India wasn't as powerful as it right now. I think it was like 12 so years ago. I don't exactly remember that. 10, 12 years ago, where there was an incident that happened with China, and even though Russia was like with good, economical discussion with China for many business opportunity, let's just say, when China was aggressor, even then Putin immediately just like threatened China, like don't go after India. Otherwise, you have to go after me too, or like send more like submarines and things. I don't know what, but something like that in bolster India basically. So historically, Russia has always supported India regardless of what. They are the first. Basically, something happens, literally next day they are the first one in line to support India. So that is not going to go anywhere.
Relationship between India, Russia, China, and the United States. Be forewarned, I will likely stumble and fall short at doing this topic justice because I'm just an average infantryman. But I think it's important for soldiers to struggle to understand the type of geopolitics that might end up dragging them to war someday. So in a nutshell, India wants to stand up to their rival China, but the only way they can do that is by working with Russia to get cheap oil and arms deals. Meanwhile, the United States also wants India to stand up to China, but at the same time, they don't want India to work with Russia. But India needs to work with China at least a little so they can avoid becoming too influenced by the United States and vice versa. All the while, all India really wants is to grow their economy in peace and lift their people out of poverty. It all makes
I don't think it's like that, right? But like I said, India is not going to sacrifice their relationship with Russia because they have been the only reliable ally so far, right? Now, at the same time, they can't rely on Russia too much. They also have to bolster themselves, like be self-independent, basically, right? So they're doing anything in their power to become strong against Pakistan and China. So they're also buying like I said, the French things. Right now, there's a recent deal going on with US, where US will start making equipments, basically military equipments in India, and there'll be partners that will benefit both. So India is basically making deals with US and everyone they can basically think of, not just with Russia. But they're not going to let go of Russia because when the shit goes down, that they'll need Russia basically. If the China and Pakistan suddenly decides to attack, they'll need Russia to basically help them. And Russia also needs India now more because of this Ukraine thing, because they're buying a lot of equipment, buying a lot of oil. So it's just like works.
Perfect sense if you don't think about it. In order to understand India's complicated relationship with Russia, we need to recognize that this is nothing new. India has maintained political, economic, and strategic ties with Moscow ever since the Cold War, something that Washington has been upset about, we could say. In fact, the US is preparing a military aid package for India worth reportedly up to $500 million. If this deal went through, it would make India one of the largest recipients of US military aid, behind only Israel and Egypt. This is designed, of course, to curb India's long historical reliance on Russian and Soviet military equipment. Because even though India has close ties with Russia, they're also considered a strong ally of the United States. And this is key to understanding India's strategy. Of course, Moscow is obviously upset about India's close relationship with the United States.
This is a nightmare's photo.
It's considered controlling to tell your
Oh, this is such a nightmare. Look at that.
Close relationship with the
Oh, this is a nightmare photo. Look at that. Every face is in
United States. Apparently, it's considered controlling to tell your friends who they cannot be friends with. I don't know. I don't have friends. Since Russia's invasion, India's appetite for Russian oil has swelled, given its current discounted low prices. An appetite that makes Russia India's top oil supplier. Russia, which made up just 0.2% of India's oil imports prior to March 31st, 2022, was supplying 9 million barrels per day of crude oil to India by November later that year, making up more than a fifth of India's oil supplies. This has caused some concerns that India's increased purchases of Russian oil has undermined Western efforts to incapacitate Moscow via economic sanctions. Consequently, these purchases may indirectly...
Really? India needs oil, right? They find it cheap. They're gonna, like, which country in the planet doesn't do things that benefits them, right? Even when, let's just say, Europe was bitching about this, Europe was still taking a lot of resources from Russia. They just immediately stop. So by this point, like, come on, really? You are taking them out, but India can't? That's just stupid.
support Russia's military operations in Ukraine, given that fossil fuels make up approximately 3/5 of Russian exports. The logic that Russian oil sanctions will curb Russian military aggression still holds. The caveat being, though, that the international community, and not just the North American and European countries, commit to such a strategy. The Indian government has been vehemently defending its trade with Russia, though, saying it makes sense
Well, West and NATO fucked up trying to manage Ukraine and Russia. It's not India's fault.
to source oil from where it's cheapest. And it's easy to forget that this works two ways. India buying billions of dollars of oil from Russia might give them some leverage and a level of influence over what Russia does. From India's perspective, this cheaper oil helps their economy and gives them a much needed economic and strategic edge against China.
Yeah.
Though energy, or the onslaught of scrutiny by the West for its energy needs, is not the key driver in India's changing relationship with Moscow, we'll learn how the key driver of India-Russia relations post-Cold War is actually China. But we're in a situation where India is being pulled in two different directions, just like they have been for almost a century. And so we see India trying to remain neutral. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has not outright condemned Russia's invasion, but he has called for dialogue and diplomacy to solve the conflict. The decisions India makes here and now will have major ramifications for the world over the next few decades. However, as Russia's invasion of Ukraine drags on, and India's stance towards the conflict comes under increasing scrutiny from the West, Western observers interpret this Indian hesitancy to follow international sanctions.
I don't understand this. Are you all stupid? You do realize we have to worry about China, right? China constantly, even right now, they're doing like some bullshit on the line, right? They're still claiming that one of the states of India is there, Arunachal Pradesh, trying to take it. God knows what they're going to do in the future. You do realize how strong China is compared to India, right? China is like creeping closer to US, let alone, being bigger than India. Military-wise, China is much stronger than India, right? It's about survival. You're gonna bitch about like why we are taking oil from Russia when we put sanctions on. It's not India's fault. You fucked up in your diplomacy. It's not our fault, right? You can just say like this doesn't make sense. So what? You want us to alienate Russia, and so what? Make friends with West that's never been relied on in the past, where they just basically pushed India aside. And at that time, China and Pakistan attacks. What the fuck India's gonna do? This is global politics, man. There's like many cogs are at play here.
Sanctions on Russia as some kind of implicit support for Moscow. But India's position on the conflict is actually far more complicated than many might appreciate. A closer look at recent Indian foreign policy reveals quiet but significant steps to reduce New Delhi's dependence on Moscow. India is now looking
Oh God, it's been that thing since 2016. The first day Modi came in, one of the first thing he said is like make in India. Everything, right? It doesn't matter what. There's a reason why imports are insane, right? Any luxury item is like cost a lot, whether it makes sense or not. It's like make in India. That's the force here. So India don't need to. Basically, what China is doing right now. China doesn't rely on anything, right? Most of the time, they do their own shit, right? That's the thing. India doesn't do that. If you compare China and India comes close. But one thing China stands out at, the make in China shit is much higher than India. India exports a lot. India always relies on things from outside. That's the problem. And when shit goes down, that's going to be a major problem. Self-reliance is really important if like war breaks out. So India already knows this. They've been doing that for like past 8 years now. They're forcing that element.
50% of their defense needs and equipment from domestic defense companies within their own country. And they're looking to further diversify by turning to Eastern European nations to purchase new military gear and ammunition. India is geopolitically important because their nation has a massive population of 1.4 billion people. India's GDP is growing at a rapid rate, up to $3.1 trillion USD today. India produces 9.2% of the world's iron ore, the fourth largest producer. And iron ore is extremely important in production of steel, which is used in all the infrastructure projects across Asia. And the reason I think this is important to all of us is India has been known as the largest democratic nation in the entire world. So they're a counterweight to authoritarian communist China. But pressures on that democratic system and the country's stability could end all that. Which brings us to India's relationship with Russia.
Yeah, just through ideology, it makes sense that India, US big partner because both are democratic countries. China being communist and obviously Russia also being similar to that, their two partnership makes sense. But US need China to make shit. So US cannot just like go against China, but at the same time they also like has to like make sure that China doesn't become aggressive. They're communist. Because of this relationship between China, Pakistan, and US, India can't rely on US. India has to rely on Russia. So it just creates this kind of a weird things, and also historical things makes it even more weirder, basically.
But I think India's foreign relations with Russia can be best summed up with what happened during the March 2023 Raisina Dialogue. The Raisina Dialogue is India's premier geopolitics forum held annually in New Delhi. During the event, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov was making a speech to an audience of India's strategic and military establishment, officers and policymakers. Lavrov then described the Ukraine conflict to them as a war that was launched against Russia. This ignited laughter from his audience because of the absurdity of that claim. This is evidence that India's military leaders know exactly what Moscow is up to, and they don't buy into Putin's propaganda. However,
who thinks? Of course, India knows. Of course, India is with Ukraine. But they can't. I think people are misunderstanding India's stance. Just like what I bitch about here in channel. India is with Ukraine, but they can't go against Russia. India doesn't like Russia's element that they're doing right now, right? India's democratic country. The current doesn't matter how much people might say like how current parties were creeping slowly towards like authoritarianism, whatever. That's not the case. The first things that Modi does, like every single policy he makes, is always like targeted to common people. If anything, it like sometimes even feels like middle class is like kind of getting strained. But there's always some policy that helps like a lowest class, lowest, poorest people, right? So, this is like biggest democracy in the world, and they're trying to make sure that stays, like that ideology stays there. How the fuck they're going to side with Russia at this point, right? And so what? Next time China can attack India and just like feels like, see how Russia attack Ukraine, China can attack India too. So they can never basically side with Russia in something like this.
What was omitted from most news reports about that is that there was actually a lot of applause and general indifference towards Lavrov throughout most of his time speaking. On social media, Indian commentators voiced a range of opinions on Lavrov's comments on the conflict, from asserting India's neutrality to maintaining pragmatic ties with Russia based on India's material needs, to active suspicion of the West. According to Dmitry Segoviev, the head of Russia's Federal Service for Military Technical Cooperation, he said, despite the unprecedented pressure on India from Western countries, led by the United States in connection with Russia's special operation in Ukraine, it continues to be one of Russia's main partners in the field of military technical cooperation. But I think what Russia is mistaking is India's goal to build a strong economy and military as a sign that they're politically aligned with Russia. Assuming that you are in the West like I am, admittedly it's not easy to understand India's relationship with Russia right now, but we need to try to understand India's perspective here and see why neutrality is actually a very deep part of India's foreign policy DNA. This is because when India gained their independence from the British Empire in August of 1947, at the time, Indian policymakers had to figure out what kind of foreign policy path they would take. They wanted to follow a path that would avoid them becoming dependent on a superpower. Following World War II at this time, the United States and the Soviet Union came out as the two largely intact great powers, and they wanted the exact opposite. One way to look at it is that the US and the Soviets wanted as many allies to become dependent on them as possible. From this backdrop, the important concept of non-alignment movement emerged, a strategy that many newly independent nation-states used to maintain their newly gained independence. But how could countries that are still developing and less powerful hope to stand up to superpowers? With counterbalancing. India and the other nations would kind of play each superpower against the other in order to remain neutral, to avoid getting pulled into the US or Soviet political and strategic orbit. Indian policymakers during the 1940s and 60s were key architects of this movement. India's first prime minister was a pioneer of the non-alignment movement. He summed it up when he said, quote, "We propose as far as possible to keep away from the power politics of groups aligned against one another, which have led in the past to world wars, and which may again lead to disaster on an even vaster scale." So from India,
I think there's more than that. India has, like, since the Mughal time. First it was Mughals, who like, this like a half a millennia or something from Mughals. Then as soon as like the Mughal thing was looking like, okay, it's like wavering even a bit, which probably wasn't, British came and British took over, right? Until all the way to 1947. So if India at that scale, which was India was like one of the biggest economies of the world, because before this, like British came to India, or even the Mughal time, right? It was like many things that was only was locally in India that world didn't have. That basically it was like one of the biggest economical world. In 1947 came, that was like one of the first things, like after all this, after centuries of this kind of like being oppressed by many other powers, this new United Nations has to be something that doesn't get caught up in big powers. That was the main thing. They didn't want to repeat the British thing or basically Mughal thing, whether directly or indirectly, right? But China is right now doing lots of this shit, indebting a lot of people under it, indirectly taking over, basically like that. So India didn't want that shit that time.
India's point of view, it's essential to world peace to avoid allying with one group or another. And this is important to understand because it describes what's happening today in many ways. The foreign policy principle of strategic autonomy was at the heart of India's non-aligned stance. What this means is that India sought to maintain autonomy over its foreign policy decision-making, without being constrained by the strategic ambitions of either the US or Soviet Union. However, the relationship between India and the Soviet Union was always kind of warmer, at times even closely aligned. Indian policymakers believed that the Soviet Union could provide valuable resources and insights for their country, which was committed to achieving rapid industrialization while also reducing poverty and stark economic disparities. The Soviet Union, on the other hand, at first saw India and other former colonial states following World War II as undeserving of Soviet aid because from their perspective, India was still governed by their former colonial rulers. However, following Stalin's death in 1953, the Soviet Union's ideological stance changed radically. In November 1955, there was a major turning point here. Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev became the first to visit India. The Soviets signed an agreement to support a steel plant, which was revolutionary at the time. It was the first deal that the Soviet Union had made outside the communist bloc. It was a major move for the Soviets away from economic isolationism of the Stalin years. Soon after, they would establish their framework with India, which would have three main pillars. 1, economic development. 2, science and technology. 3, defense of the Soviet-India relationship. To say this was a big deal would be an understatement. The cooperation between India and the Soviet Union in exports went from $0.5 million in 1953 to exploding to $235 million in 1964. The imports and loans followed the similar trend, and at the same time we saw Russia move into India's energy market by offering them oil at 25 cents per barrel cheaper. Sound familiar? But New Delhi was always careful to avoid becoming too closely aligned with Moscow. However, that juggling act became really difficult once the Soviet Union became India's primary arms and military supplier and security partner instead of the West. See, after 1964, the Soviet Union emerged as the primary supplier of arms to India for all three branches of its military. Ordnance Factory Medka, a major manufacturing of military equipment plant in India, employs 3,000 people. They create the Russian BMP vehicles there. India's armed forces.
Look, there are only two major powers back then, probably now, that produce military equipment on the larger scale. One was the US, one was Soviet Union, right? And I think, the better way to looking at this, that only reason why India and Soviet Union became allied in the first place is because India and US cannot. US and India's partnership was like, cracked, let's just say, because like I said, US needed to be partnered with China to counter Soviet Union, right? Soviet Union was their biggest threat in Cold War. So US sided with China and basically Pakistan, and that automatically makes India opposite because of the China and Pakistan's relations with India, right? Enemy of your enemy becomes my enemy type of shit, if not directly, somewhat. So India needed Soviet Union. That was the thing. And Soviet Union, US are the only major equipment maker. So India has to rely on Soviet Union for equipment and things. That still continued all the way today until they're slowly changing. Now also buying Western things, trying to make local things.
operates about 2,500 BMP-2s. India has a combined total of over 4,000 Russian-style T-series tanks, including the T-90 and T-72, but they are only now switching to Western-style equipment with their new Arjun tank, and there are plans to produce a domestic replacement for the BMP. But the point of all this is to say that historically speaking, the Soviet and Indian militaries have been operationally tied for a long time, with Indian defense personnel receiving training from Soviet-made weapons. Moreover, India would receive critical military, economic, and diplomatic assistance from the Soviet Union in times of crisis. For example, the Soviets successfully brokered peace between India and Pakistan over the Second Kashmir War in 1965. Additionally, the Soviet Union contributed significantly to the development of India's public sector economy through technical assistance and aid, particularly in heavy industries such as steelmaking and energy.
I mean, that is literally like, somebody can make a video, basically, like how much Soviet Union helped India progress in every sector. And like, if India can stand right now on the global stage as like a significant enough military power to counter something like China, most major things are probably, either like technology was given by Russia or literally military equipment bought from Russia, from like upcoming like, nuclear submarines and things, and a lot of things, even the nukes and shit, right? All of that can be there was a very specific time where US was basically point blank denying supporting India in any military technology wise because of the China and Pakistan thing. Russia basically, even Russia didn't have to do it because India wasn't that even significant. But Russia like, okay, you want it, you can take it type of stance. Soviet Union, Russia. In a lot of places where Soviet Union and Russia probably didn't need to give something to India, they did. So India, all the people basically, even today in people's heart, people remember that. If you averagely ask any Indian guy basically coming India, they would have this stance of Russia. Like they would have like a warmer stance of Russia. Even if they basically, if they're informed and realize like how wrong is Ukraine invasion is, they'll still have warm thoughts about Russia because of that. It's like if your brother suddenly, like your brother who you grew up with, suddenly become an asshole, it's still your brother. You're not gonna throw him aside, type of element.
Production. The US, on the other hand, champion of private enterprise, was less supportive of state-run industries in India. This created more opportunities for the Soviet Union to expand its commercial ties with India. The Soviet Union played a key role in supporting India's early nuclear program. They provided technical assistance and materials for the construction of India's first nuclear.
Hold up, that's not Yeti. It looked like Yeti. Is that Yeti? Why doesn't it look like Yeti? What is this? Mike looks like Yeti.
Reactor. Today, India is one of 7 countries in the world with nuclear weapons. The India-Soviet relationship expanded so far it went to space. This isn't to say there were no bumps in the relationship along the way, but it remained strong until the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. India was then forced to reevaluate its ties with the United States following the collapse of the Soviet Union. They decided, hey, it'd be nice to be friends with the winner of the Cold War, maybe. India then emerged as a major defense partner of the United States. But cutting ties with another nation like Russia, even if you no longer align with them, is often difficult and takes a long time for a number of reasons. For one, Russia continues to be India's key supplier of defense equipment, accounting for a significant portion of India's defense imports. As a legacy of Indo-Soviet,
India didn't cut ties with Russia, they expanded. Russia is still their biggest, basically when it comes to oil and military equipment, they're still the biggest one. Still to this day, not just post-Soviet Union.
Cold War relations, around 85% of India's military equipment at the turn of the 21st century was of Soviet origin, leading to a prolonged reliance on Moscow for spare parts and modified versions of Soviet-made firearms, missiles, and aircrafts. New Delhi has continued to collaborate with Moscow on the development of a range of modern defense systems, such as the BrahMos cruise missile, as well as the purchase of Russian-made S-400 anti-air missile defense systems, which it signed for in October of 2018 and began receiving back in late 2021. But who would India side with if the shit hit the fan? Who would India really join if World War III were to kick off tomorrow and the roosters came home to roost and the cows came back to cowing?
Russia.
The answer is tough to say. I'm biased, but personally, I would like to think that they would side with the United States, even though today India has continued.
Look, man, here's the thing. If the shit hit the fans, like which type of shit, probably will depend. But right now, today, probably Russia, just because of the historical, like I said, like reliance, right? Soviet, even Russia's historical alliance. Because obviously, this video makes you think like as soon as Soviet Union fell, all the strong allies, strong allied thing got broken away. That's not the case. Like I said, even in the past 15 years, there have been instances with the China and Pakistan where they were aggressor and Russia instantly send some kind of a thing to help or bolster India, basically to make think China like, okay, let's back up a bit, right? Even like recently, like 2-3 years ago, there was some technology that India was looking to buy from US, but US just like denying it, but they were still giving it to Pakistan or China, not China, Pakistan, I think, where India was basically looking to then Russia to, similar technology to seal the deal. I don't know what happened to that, but something probably sure they would deal with Russia in that way. So even you would think like now with the China and straining things, like US would understand India's position for global top scale equipment when they buy, but still US denied it. So things like this make India think like it's not best to completely side with US. Like they might not be completely reliable when the shit hit the fan.
Continue to be guided by the principle of strategic autonomy. This is often misinterpreted, though, as India having some kind of aversion to alliances. But the fact is that since 1991, India has found itself involved in increasingly more and more bilateral and multilateral strategic partnerships with more than 30 other countries at this point. Multilateral relations in international affairs is basically like being in a polyamorous or an open relationship. For instance, India is a member state.
India started to also in past 5-6 years since the newer government came in, they have tried to basically help out those smaller countries in Africa and places like that, trying to give aid. Like India is now in position where they can help like smaller countries somehow. India's in very weird position. India is poor, but at the same time not poor. It's like a mix of shit type of way. So they can basically do that now. So they're like building their own small unit like that. Probably not going to be that much significance when the shit hit the fence, but still it's like a start. Like 15-20 years from now, that will have a difference.
State of both the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, Quad, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO. The former being a strategic partnership often described as a counterweight to China's assertiveness, the latter viewed as a counterweight to US hegemony. Though it is important to note that neither the Quad nor the SCO are military alliances. In layman, average infantryman terms that even I could understand, in Barney style, these groups are simply forums where member countries can discuss their insecurities and ambitions as a group, like adults. Now, where can I go to discuss my insecurities? Unlike NATO, there is no Article 5, equivalent for the Quad, or the SCO, that forces military action of any kind. But one of the biggest ties for India and Russia is the multilateral partnership of BRICS. For Moscow, BRICS is primarily about geopolitics, countering US hegemony, while New Delhi has long been understood to frame their involvement in BRICS in terms of economic benefits. BRICS partnerships with Russia has had several economic benefits for India. One being India's energy security. As India's population and economy continues to grow, their demand for energy continues to rise, leading to India ongoing reliance on oil imports for its energy needs. So behind BRICS and India's strategic partnership with Russia is this shared idea of a multipolar world. This shared idea of building a multipolar world whereby a concert of non-Western powers limit the influence of the United States and its allies in Eurasia involved a powerful China. This concept has often been dubbed the strategic triangle, or Russia-India-China triangle, but I wouldn't exactly call it a love triangle, because both India and Russia are concerned about China's military and economic power that's outpacing them. Now we can again see why India and Russia have this incentive to cooperate on security issues in order to balance against China's military influence. This is important because if Russia becomes weaker and more dependent on China, we could see Putin take action against India's interests in order to help China.
Yeah, but at the same time, you really need to look at the history of things, like how Russia/Soviet Union has been. Do you see in any scenario, doesn't matter how bad things can get to Russia can ever rely fully on China like that? Maybe a good partnership, maybe balanced partnership, show like Russia, like a lot of things coming from China for Russia. Like Russia has like good interests with China. No, I think, for centuries, like multiple centuries, Russia has always been some kind of a power, even if their economy is like fucking up. They're always doing something, like they're coming up with some technology here and there. They have something like it's it might be surprising to a lot of people like how Russia can even keep up at the global scale, but they somehow always find a way to do that. I don't see Putin and Russia being not enough power that they would be completely rely on China, even if shit goes really bad for recent things. I don't see that, right? I don't see any element where China can force Putin into doing anything. But yeah, if shit like that does happen, like India would basically, at that point, like China, Russia, India relationship will be close to like nothing. That would be a weird time, not gonna lie, right? It's scary time for India because if like Russia-Indian relationship goes away, who do India rely on now, right? But India can't rely on Russia, US, because there is no history with US. Even if they make ties right now, why would US help in India any sense? Even if they become ally now, it's not like there's no history to that, right? So it's a very weird place for India. That's why India is in panic mode for past 6-7 years, trying to bolster their Make in India thing, just trying to keep economy growing, just to trying to make sure poverty doesn't rise that much, right? So when people think of anything about India and what it does, why is it like not condemning Russia? Why is it not doing this? You need to understand, like, India is constantly on panic mode, and any kind of conflict happens, India's probably like, what the fuck? That's their response, because they don't want that shit. Right now, their whole goal is to like economically grow, because there are 1.4 billion people in India, right? So just to stay afloat, India's struggling right now in this way, basically. Obviously, it's getting stronger, but it's 1.4 billion people. There's many things that Modi has to think of right now. So that's why all the forums, everything is like economic driven. Whenever like conflict with China or Pakistan, border skirmishes happen, there's always like a tension thing for India, right? They would prefer if shit like that doesn't happen. They prefer if like conflict doesn't happen. They would prefer if they don't have to spend money in military, they can spend somewhere else. So right now, India is in very weird, panic state place. They are not choosing specific thing because they want to, because they have to. Only thing I can summarize about why India doing something because they have to. It's about survival at this point.
If that sounds crazy, there's actually historical precedence for this. The Soviet Union delayed their delivery of the MiG-21 aircraft to India in order to gain China's support during the Cuban Missile Crisis. There's currently an Indian debate on whether their nation still has meaningful ability to influence Moscow. Could India help prevent a Russian drift towards China?
Now, yes.
New Delhi's purchase of
Look, right now, right at this second, India is purchasing a lot of shit, especially with the current conflict, that gives unique position to India to influence Moscow. Because if India suddenly stops taking things from Moscow and suddenly finds different, sellers, saying that would hurt Moscow is an understatement. So after Ukraine war, yes, India is in unique position to influence Moscow. But at the same time, China, because of communistic ideologies, they're supplying Russia with official and unofficial thing a lot. How much that's going to increase during this Ukraine conflict, God knows. So yeah, this future, I would have never thought the conflict between Russia and Ukraine would be so significant for India. That future geopolitics might change for India.
Discounted crude oil from Moscow following Western oil sanctions could be seen in this light, as India imported 21 billion USD in Russian crude oil from April to December 2022, accounting for 17.1% of its total crude imports. This, theoretically though, could give India some leverage over Moscow. But India has also taken some important steps to protect themselves by diversifying. Some of those recent moves are the following. In 2021, India ceased the import of over 100 defense items to boost domestic production of defense equipment. The ban includes items like artillery guns, assault rifles, and transportation aircraft.
Yeah, you think that Russia would be pissed off about this, but I'm pretty sure like a month or ago, I don't know, like Putin in its some kind of like a press conference was praising actually about this. Like he didn't have to bring this up. He was pointing out like how important this is. And he also like he's helping India doing this or something like that, like Make in India initiative of Modi. He was talking about it, like how good this is and how important this is. And basically Russia also needs to like increase that element of it, and other countries as well, type of element. So Putin knows this. Putin knows this is happening. Putin knows that India has to self-reliant against China and something. Like let's say right now shit hits the fan. How is Russia going to help India? Because Russia is already doing things in Ukraine. They can't do shit against Ukraine right now. How are they going to help India? So Russia realizes like India has to bolster itself like this, right? 20 years ago, India was relying on Russia a lot for a lot of things. Like I said, like if Russia didn't help or Soviet Union didn't help, India would have been run over easily. So, this thing is increasing. That's not problem against Russia. But at the same time, Russia's not going to forget the times like this where, India did bought a lot of crude oil, even at discounted, but still bought it when the sanctions were rising. Yeah, you can think of it like, well, India is doing shitty things by buying it, but you're seeing it from your perspective for, your country. What about India? We have our own interests as well. We need to think about our survival as well, right? So, yeah.
Which were mostly imported from Russia. The move is part of the Make in India initiative, which aims to boost domestic manufacturing and reduce dependence on imports. In the energy sector, in 2020, India signed a deal with the United States to purchase liquefied natural gas as part of its efforts to diversify its energy.
This is one of the reasons why India liked Trump a lot. People constantly bring up especially Trump haters constantly bring up why India likes Trump. It's not because India completely aligns with they like Trump or something, or I don't know, they might. I don't know. India's 1.4 billion people. Everybody can have a different opinion based on whatever news they can get. The point is, they were trying to diversify, and Trump was the president at the time. Like I said, India is in constant panic mode, right? If they could find a stable relationship with the US and could rely on them, they would. But historically, they can't, so they can't take the chance.
Energy resources and reduce dependence on Russia. The deal includes the supply of 6 million metric tons of LNG per year for 20 years, with the first shipment expected to arrive in 2024. Strategic partnerships. In 2021, you might not know this, but India and Japan signed a memorandum of understanding to enhance cooperation in the defense sector. The MOA includes joint research, development, and
the Japan thing is way too. I'm a civil contractor, like I said. I'm an industrial civil contractor. I don't build residential areas and things. But I mostly focus on industrial sector. And past 6 years or so, Japanese companies have increased, especially in my state, which is basically Modi state, Gujarat. Industries from Japan has increased a lot, insanely large. I've made something called Daiichi, which is something I think in Japanese means first or something. Pharmaceutical factories, multiple of them, still another plant of same company is contract is up there. So things like that. A lot of Japanese company now, they're Bullet Train is being literally being made. It's very close to my home, it's passing through. Right, Bullet Train is being made. So Japanese economical thing has ramped up a lot in past 5-6 years.
And production of defense equipment, which will help India reduce its dependence on Russia in the defense sector. India's recent purchase of military equipment from the US, as well as its collaboration with Japan.
Not gonna lie, Modi has beard. I'm oh damn, that's a sick beard. I like that. I like to have that, but I don't think I can grow that, or I don't think I can wait that much to grow. I just I might just cut it off at certain point. I can't grow that much. I can grow it, but I can't because it's just I don't know, somewhat OCD flares up or something. I don't know. It's just I can't I don't need this shit. I just basically cut it off. But now look at this, holy shit. After his speech is done here, I'm guessing he's gonna ride off in some kind of a Harley or something. Look at that beard. Before it was this, now it's all the way here. After 2-3 years, I guess it's gonna be all the way here, those bikers are gonna put goggles on, leather jacket, and Harley.
Structure projects signal a growing willingness to diversify its foreign relations.
I want that kind of beard,
India
but can't
set
do it.
An ambitious goal of reaching 175 gigawatts of installed renewable energy capacity by 2022 and achieving 119 gigawatts of this by November 2022. These quiet but significant steps suggest that India is actively seeking to balance its relationship with Russia and the West, rather than playing favorites.
When it comes to renewable, holy shit, with I've never seen a government work this fast apart from Modi government, right? I'm not a fan of anybody. Okay, you are this, you are either left or you're right. I always hated the analogies. What the fuck you on about? I'm not some simpleton. I don't align with any party or align with any type of thing. Hell, if India does something wrong, I won't even align with India. It's people think that's patriotism. No, it's nationalism. Patriotism means liking your country, but at the same time seeing their flaws, right? I'm a patriot, not a nationalist. But the point is, Modi government is doing a lot of things right. There was no fucking solar panels everywhere. In span of 6 months in my fucking city, There are bridges that are being made that has like solar panel roofs on it. Like what the fuck? There's literally light, street light where I'm living right now. I'm living at the edge of the road, like a roadside house. So it's easier basically. So I have a roadside house, right? And in this like a corporate whatever, like city lights. These are solar power lights. They only work through solar panel. Like entire city has like solar power lights, street lights. There are no direct one. It's like solar panel thing and renewable energy has like ramped up a lot. Even I remember an interview where Modi said like, I want to do everything, but it's like I have limitation. If I could do it, I would like replace everything with solar power, but I can't. I'm trying to put plants on, and there are literal solar panel plants that are like being worked on right now.
Favorites. The ongoing conflict in Ukraine has raised concerns about the deepening alliance between Russia and China and the potential implications for India's strategic interests, as India defense planners now prepare for the possibility of a weakened Russia that is more dependent on China, which could act against India's interest. India is likely going to navigate the changing security landscape by relying more on its diverse network of strategic partnerships. As India seeks to balance its relations with China, the US, and other strategic partners, its partnership with Russia will remain a critical component of its foreign policy. I'm your average infantryman. Thank you so much.
Yep, there you go. I think if China-India war breaks out right now, Russia would be siding with India just because of their interest. China is such a superpower that Russia should be threatened, and they are. And if like shit it depends, they're probably gonna side with India, even if like long term there might be a problem, but they know they can still rely on India that way. China thing is like, if they side with China, they know India is like completely alienated. And China, you can never rely on China because China itself is a superpower, might dominate you one day. But if like Russia becomes fully dependent on China, then the case is different. At that point, like Putin failed. He failed completely. He basically came with like a superpower. There was like, they didn't have that top of a GDP. Their economy was really bad, and still they were superpower. They initiated some kind of war in Ukraine, and in the end result is their puppet of China. That's that moment. Putin is just like completely failed. So yeah, if that happens, like I don't know, like India slowly becomes stronger, and the pace that India is following, even if like for next 7 or so years, if there is no major conflict between India and China, India will be enough of a strong position. They can independently face China. They can still do it now. I think we have enough military power to face off China without any help. But at the global scale, like a full-out on war, I don't know why they would ever. I still maintain like fight between major power, full-blown will never happen, right? Because right now, everything is happening. No two nuclear powers are fighting, which is still not the case. Nuclear deterrents are still working. No two nuclear powers are really fighting. So we don't have like precedents that might even happen. And if it does happen, right, both are going to suffer. Like China economy is great, but not that. It's like slowly not declining, like stagnating somewhat. So they don't want to take that risk either. So I don't think like all the talk of war, I don't think like major scale wars are coming at all. Everybody going to fear nuclear weapons. No way in hell they're not. Only madmen would not fear it. And I don't think that's going to happen. But yeah. Well, that was India's problem with Russia is worse than you think. I don't think it's a problem. It's a geopolitics problem. And I think they had this problem for a long time. If anything, they have less problem now because India has become somewhat stable. India was never stable, right? I'm an Indian, and I'll tell you right now, India was weak in a way. Even if we were strong, we were weaker just because of where we are. And geopolitically, we were always weaker because we were always relied on something somewhere and never could do anything independent. There are countries that don't have to worry about their regional security. India is one of the worst country if you think about the planet where they have to worry about regional security because there's Pakistan, there's China, and now Pakistan, China with the Belt and Road Initiative might as well be a one country because one road is enough to support in a military warfare if it's that kind of way, you know. So that's a problem. This is why, like, you know, India's ramping up troops in Jammu Kashmir just to put enough pressure. So maybe, I don't know, like Belt and Road thing get delayed or something. Because if it finishes, like that's going to be even bigger threat to India. So India is just in survival mode. India has to do things. That's why they're doing it. Right? I'll see you next time.